Up today on Bridges, Courtney Grah is my guest, and she's going to share with us how she realized you don't have to be a big name in order for God to work in and through your life. I'm so glad that you could join us for Bridges today. My name is Monica Schmelter, and my guest is Courtney Grah. And Courtney, good to meet you and have you here today on Bridges.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I'm looking forward to getting to know you better, and I know that you're with WhoUWith Ministries.
Yes.
And wanted to start out with, Courtney, kind of your story. What led you to become involved in that kind of a ministry?
Well, I was raised in an incredible Christian home, and my dad was a high school football coach my whole life, and I can remember pretty early on in high school being involved in the youth group and just in sports so much, seeing such an opportunity to be able to share Christ through sports, and with my dad just being so open with his faith. I just was so motivated. But
So you really got to see a good example growing
Oh,
up.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. My dad was a great example. I remember in the mornings getting up of him being in his room, in one room in the Word and praying, and my mom being in another room. And every single morning they both would pray over me before I would go to school. So even the earliest of mornings, I hated it at the time. Now I'm so grateful for it.
Yes, what an incredible gift to you that you got to see that kind of example. So you grew up in this great Christian home,
Yes.
and your dad loves football. He's a football coach, so you kind of always been around it, and you saw him share his faith through his work.
Absolutely. And the Fellowship of Christian Athletes was a ministry that was huge in his life, and just directing him in a way that he was able to share his faith with a lot of his players and coaches. And so he got me very involved in that in high school, and that's when I really started to understand what it meant to have a relationship with Christ and how to live that out with my teammates and at my high school, and watching him do that was very powerful.
Such a great example.
Yes.
So now you're with WhoUWith Ministries. Tell me what that is about, and what capacity that you serve there.
Yes, WhoUWith Ministries, I've been there, I'm starting my 8th year there, and it is a ministry that is to the athletes on Vanderbilt's campus. I'm the women's director, and I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of the different teams. We have Bible studies throughout the week with a lot of the female athletes from different sports being involved, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of discipleship, and a lot of just sharing my faith with girls who have never heard about Christ, and just being able to really pour into them.
Now, Courtney, I had someone just ask me the other day. Someone was talking about sharing the gospel, and someone looked at me and said, I guess it really wasn't a question. They said something like, we live in America. Everybody's heard the gospel. And I said, I don't know for sure that that's the case. So you're saying you do meet women who really haven't heard the gospel before?
Oh, 100%.
Really, right here in America?
Yes, ma'am. I would say that's probably one of my favorite parts of the ministry is being able to pour into girls who have never, it's really not unheard of for them to have never heard of really who Jesus is, and the cross and the resurrection, and just understanding sin and grace and his love. That honestly is very often when I meet with girls, I get the opportunity to share Christ with them. And I have a lot that come that are not ready, and they just keep coming, and I watch God move and work in their lives. So I would say sometimes 50% of the girls that I meet with varies from year to year.
Sure.
But have never heard the gospel.
That's amazing, because I think that most people think, well, this is America. Everybody's heard about Jesus.
Yes.
Everybody's heard about the Bible. And you're saying really it could vary, but about 50%, you would say it's fair to say, have never heard the gospel.
Oh, yeah.
But they come to your Bible studies.
I think what I've realized with this ministry is it's a safe place for them, and it's all about relationships. And so me showing up at practice, or me going to a game, or just making myself available to have lunch or coffee, and building a relationship that they can trust me, not feel judged, and loved feel loved by me opens up the door for an opportunity for me to be able just to, in a process, share Christ with them. And it's really a beautiful thing to watch them understand that and grow in that. And I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to do that.
Well, it sounds like an incredible opportunity that's kind of a door that God has opened for you that most people don't ever get that opportunity to meet so many people that have never heard about faith yet. So you're kind of really out there on the front line, so to speak, speaking to athletes, people that, have that in common, that sport, but you get to introduce them to what really matters. How do you see, you said 8 years you've been there?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you see, just in general, young women's lives change as you share with them?
I think the biggest thing for me is either them giving their life to Christ, and sometimes that's them starting as a freshman and maybe not happening until their senior year. This past Easter, we had 2 junior soccer girls that have been coming since they were freshmen, understanding, trying to get a grasp on it all, went on a retreat with us and gave their life to Christ at the retreat. And through that, we were able to do their baptism on Easter Sunday as a ministry together. It was so powerful. So I think just being able just to understand where they are and just loving them and understand my job is to point them to Christ, share Christ with them, and His timing is always perfect, which is hard in ministry sometimes.
Yeah, because we all want it to be now, or I mean, at least I do.
Yes.
And yet we see, even from the example of Christ, He built relationships with people, and He allowed people to choose. And I think for us sometimes, I know for me, it's like so hard because it's like, I know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and I want you to do that now. But respecting His timetable and understanding that, we plant seeds, we water them, but He's the one that gives the increase. We can't really make that happen. And that your life and your career, that's what you're doing. And you're working with athletes. Do athletes have, what you would consider to be special needs or special considerations than other people when you're sharing faith? Or
sometimes athletes are driven by action.
Yeah.
And they want to understand the why behind every little detail, and they want to be perfectionist at things. And I get that because I was an athlete. And so for them, sometimes it's all about, can I work my way into this, and can I do enough? So yes, it is different. A lot of times meeting with athletes and coaches and explaining to them that we're saved by grace alone, and it's through our faith, and helping them to process that it's not how hard you work, because they're taught with their sport attitude and effort, and give your very best and everything, and go hard and work your way to that starting position or that leadership role. So yes, that can be difficult with them.
And that, when you're in sports, winning, I know everybody says winning isn't everything, but it sure is wonderful, right?
Yeah, it is wonderful. Yes,
it's certainly better than losing.
Yes.
I mean, we may learn lessons from losing, but goodness, if I'm going to do something, I want to win.
Yes, that's right. Me too.
And, in this Christian life, as I look at my life and my faith and how it plays out, sometimes I learn the most when I don't win. And sometimes it's the failure that really propels me to grow closer to the Lord. And I would think with someone that's athletically driven and that wants to win, that's got to be hard to learn.
That's very hard to learn. And I think that is some of the greatest opportunities you have in sharing your faith is through the losses or even through the injuries. We had a young girl come in last night, and she is new to our ministry and has had a knee injury and just really struggling and battling through that and not getting to where she wants to be. But so many of her teammates were able to speak truth to her and remind her of why God can use her even with her injury, and in the loss of just not being able to play and not being on the field and not being able to compete, that she still has a purpose on that team. And so I think the loss is hard. I'm just like you. Everybody wants to win.
Yeah.
And that competitive nature, it makes things so much better.
Yeah, because we have to learn. But I've always said, It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And I
That's
used to
right.
think that's true, but like seriously, I want to win nonetheless. It's that whole tension in
Yes.
just real life and living in a fallen
Yes.
world and wanting to be able to do well. Do you recall, Courtney, in your life when you realized that this was really a calling for you to work with athletes and share faith and discipleship?
I do. In high school, I can remember people speaking that over me, whether it was with my youth group or I was a leader in our FCA, and I remember them speaking that over me, that I see you doing ministry. And I can remember hearing that. So in college, I played volleyball at Tennessee Tech, and ministry wasn't really an option for my degree or with the route I wanted to take. So I chose to do education and coaching with health, because that's the other thing that I was passionate about. And even in all of that, seeing how God was still preparing me to be with athletes and coaches, I really felt in college Him making that clear to me, that path, but wasn't sure how that was going to come about. And God sort of just opened up the door right out of college for me to be able to do ministry with athletes.
Yeah, and that's how we know it's God, when He just opens up the door. And sometimes we just don't even see that coming.
Right.
What are some of the, would you say, are the biggest questions that athletes ask you that they struggle with before they believe, or are there big questions?
Oh, yeah. I think they all have big questions. I would say probably the first thing that you said is, why do these bad things happen to me, whether it's an injury or a loss or just trying to understand not being able to start in a position, or being the best at their high school and coming to college and not being the best anymore.
Yeah.
So I think just that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But also understanding His love, whether it's their past or the shame that they have or guilt of things from their past, or just not really ever been taught how deep and wide and long and high His love is for us. For them to be able to process that is hard.
And those are big questions. We've got to take a break. We want you to stay with us here today on Bridges as we continue to talk about God working in and through our lives by faith.
You can purchase a copy of today's show for $15. Call us at 615-754-0039 or send a check to the address on the screen. Please mention the program number on the screen.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org. Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, write to the address on the screen. Call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
So if you're just joining us today on Bridges, I'm talking with Courtney Grah. We're talking about her faith, her work, and how she works as a women's director with ministry, with women in ministry, and just how important that is, and some of the things that she faces while doing that. And Courtney, just before the break, you were talking about you're with WhoUWith Ministries, and you work with female athletes, and some of their big questions are like, why do bad things happen to good people? How come I'm working so hard and I'm not, a starter, or all of those things? And how do you answer those things?
The biggest thing for me and what I've learned is not telling them, do this or do that, or just being able to just walk through them and understand that God has a plan and a purpose, and that's where our faith comes in. And that's kind of an opportunity for me to share. It's where we have to trust that He's in full control,
Right.
and that He has a specific purpose for this, and being able to speak to things that I've even gone through with my college and with volleyball, and just my experiences with it, and walking them through, obviously, the scriptures and the truths, and reminding them of what God says about what He has planned for them, and not necessarily change this about yourself, or you should be this way, because a lot of times they won't respond to that.
Right. Well, I failed in that area a lot. Like, I've wanted to tell people, well, if you'll just do this, this, and this, and realizing that's not really helpful. And sometimes falling into the trap of trying to answer really hard questions, like who really has the answer
That's right.
to why bad things happen to good people?
right.
Like there's no answer that I could give to a young woman or a middle-aged woman who got this huge injury when they'd been working really hard to do something, right?
Right.
What could I say that would make her or make myself go,
That's it.
all better now?
Right.
It's trust.
It is trust.
It's trust. What are some of the examples that you share with them from your life that helped build your trust in hard situations?
A lot of times I just share from the experiences that God took me through. I played college as a walk-on for 2.5 years, so I wasn't on scholarship when I went to play, but felt God really tugging at me to try. And I, again, have a competitive spirit, and so felt that drive. And the coaches that I played for had never kept a walk-on in their 17 years of coaching, and it was a hard experience. Just the way I was treated, the way I was talked to, just not feeling like I was ever enough. And as a player or even as a person, went through struggles of low self-esteem. So a lot of times those experiences, just being able to share, I've been there, but this is what God taught me through that. And this is where I saw God in the midst of this, and reminding them that there's so much more, even though I know it's tough, than just the game itself. God can use you in so many ways on your team.
Right. And I think, Courtney, one of the things that I've learned and experienced in my life is that sometimes I'm praying about one thing, and I want it to go this way, or I want to be accepted for this, or do well at that. And yet I struggle, or I don't get selected, or I fail. And so I look at that as a bad thing, but really, if I've learned patience, if I've learned grace, if I've learned to trust God in hardship, that's what God was after.
Yes.
But I mistakenly thought it was the wrong thing.
Yes,
But that's
yes.
where relationship, right? That's where
right.
relationship makes all the difference. And one of the things that I read about you before you got here was that, and it's something that is very true, that none of us have to have a big name in order for God to work in and through our lives. And yet we think that. Like we think, well, I could do more if I had the influence of so-and-so, or I could do more if I had this. But really, that's not true, is it?
No, not at all. And I believed that for a while, even when people would tell me, Courtney, I see this calling on your life to minister to high school girls or college girls or even women of all ages. And I can remember just receiving that, but also just thinking, I'm Courtney Grah. Like, who is that? That I could never be used. And having to just trust that God can use you wherever you are, and that you don't have to have a name for that to happen. It's more about an obedient heart. And in high school, one of my favorite verses was, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, not as you're working for the Lord and not for man, and Colossians. And I think that just became life to me, that I'm not doing this to please man or people, but I'm doing this to bring him glory. And when I got over who you are is his masterpiece, and he may want to use you as a wife and as a mom, or in your community or your church or your town or whatever it may be, and you don't have to have a big name for him to do that.
No, and you don't have to have an official ministry, like whatever that is. Like you don't have to have, like you don't have to have a title, an official ministry of this or that. You don't have to have written a book. It's nice if God calls us to do those things, but that is not what it's all about. It's just not. And I think about what brings God glory is like when we're honest.
Yes.
When we make a commitment and we keep it, when we show up on time, when we keep faith in really hard times, when we're patient with people, when it would be so much easier to get angry. And I think about, I didn't always think that those qualities were what were most important. I thought that I needed to achieve something.
Yes.
But yet, in the times that I could be patient, that's what brought God glory. And I just think sometimes we look at things a little bit backward.
We do.
You mentioned that it doesn't have to be a title. You could be being a wife, a sister, a mom. How does that apply to your life and your family?
I'm the mother of 3 boys.
So you're busy.
I am busy. I always tell people when I say that, pray for me, which I love. And I get asked that question a lot, Courtney, how do you try to be the best wife you can be, and try to be a great mom, and do ministry at Vanderbilt, and ministry just in your local church or your community. And my best answer for that is I just try to, what you said, make myself available and hear his voice. Because I do think we have to have boundaries and we have to have margins, but a lot of times I feel like we just come up with excuses of, you know, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that. And some of my greatest ministry opportunities, my boys have been a part of with me.
Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, it's so awesome. I know as they get older, and that was me as a coach's daughter, watching my dad share Christ with so many boys. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're fine.
Okay. It was huge for me.
It means a lot to our children. Our children just love us because they're our children. But to see, I think what you're saying, see your father share his faith so openly in what wouldn't be considered a ministry position. Like, he put his faith on the line. You saw that in action, and that built you up as a young woman.
And I think that made me, God used that to make me who I am today and in ministry. And so if my boys just get a little taste of what I got in watching, and even now, after 40 years of him coaching football, still talking to the players that he coached.
Oh my
who are
goodness.
now dads and who are now husbands, and just still being able to be a godly influence on them is so huge. And so for me, when people ask me that about ministry, I do think at times you have to say no, but more often I think God's just wants a willing heart. He wants us just to say, here I am, God, use me. And a lot of times it's just keeping your children involved. With our ministry at Vanderbilt, my boys, I'll at night tell them about it, and we'll pray specifically for one of my athletes. And sometimes they'll ask me, Mom, how's she doing? And I may say, she's still struggling, we got to keep praying. Or it's an opportunity for me to say, God, answer that prayer.
So you've really brought them alongside of you. Which I think is so important, because I think sometimes we think, well, you know, you're young, they're separate, this is like what I do. But because I'm sure of the example that your dad set, and you got to see him, you know, to bring them alongside of you so that they don't have to resent that time away. They're a part of it. They're a part of praying, and they get to see those answered prayers too.
And my mom was huge about, my dad, I think, would probably say, if he was watching this, he wasn't at home as much as he would like to be. But for me, I'm grateful that my mom saw that this was a calling on his life, and we could be a part of that with him. And so she taught us, we pray for Dad's players, and we pray for opportunities for Dad to share Christ with people. And so my prayer is that my boys see that God is first, my husband is second, and my boys are after that, but we can do ministry together.
Exactly, because the real answer is the more we love Jesus, the more that we love our family. So it's not like they have to compete with what we're doing for ministry or that relationship with Christ, because the more that we love him, the more love that we have for our husbands and for our children. And I think what you just said about your mom is so important as a wife, because so many women fall into the trap of accidentally thinking that they're competing for their husband's time with whatever his career or work is. Instead of coming around him and praying for him and realizing that not only is that providing for family, right? It's an opportunity to witness. It's all of us pulling together. That's what matters, right?
And I think that was huge for me to see that with my mom. My husband is a football coach now, so my dad said I knew what I was getting myself into, but I'm so grateful that my mom showed us how to love through that, and the difficult times when it's season and they aren't at home a lot, but those are opportunities that she would use for us to pray for Dad or to pray for his players and remind us that Dad is being used. And I think it's all about your attitude.
Absolutely, and modeling for our children this is how we think about this.
Yes.
You know, he's making this sacrifice and we're praying for him, and this is a great opportunity, and Dad still loves our family even though he's not here. Those are all essential things. So I'm so glad that you shared that.
Yes.
That is so good. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved being here.
It's so good, and I appreciate you for the work that you do. It's so important, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I know that you've enjoyed this story as you've heard about Courtney Grah and her faith and how all of that works with her family, her husband, her children, their ministry. It's just so good when we can put all of that together. I'll be back with closing comments in just a moment.
Log on to www.ctntv.org, where you can make a prayer request, view our program guide, see who's on bridges, or even watch one of Monica's latest teachings. Log on to www.ctntv.org.
Don't give in. God's word says you're an overcomer. If you hadn't done blah, 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 this wouldn't have happened. And let me say this to you. If you think that you are in a mess of your own making, you are still an overcomer. When that temptation comes, you want to make sure that you are dressed for battle. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. It takes training. It takes discipline. And so when you're fighting that good fight of the faith, you take your story, whatever it is, and you saturate it in faith, and you fight for it.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your next event.
As I look at the interview today with Courtney Grah and how she shared that 50% roundabout of the student athletes she works with right here in at Vanderbilt have never heard the gospel before, that they really haven't heard about the love of God through his son, Christ Jesus. That is amazing and astounding. And yet it can serve as a very powerful reminder and encouragement to you and to me to be willing and ready to share our faith. So often, of course, work is something that we do, and we do the work because we need to earn an income, because we like to serve, we need that structure in our lives. But also, work is an opportunity to build relationships with coworkers who may have never heard the gospel. And I want to say this, I think it's important for us to remember that the Bible tells us that where work is concerned, that we're to be diligent, that we're to be working for our employers as unto the Lord. So I think that means, we need to do our jobs. We can't be sharing our faith all 8 hours of the day. But what we can do is look for opportunities to share our faith with our coworkers, maybe at lunch, maybe during coffee break, whatever that might look like, to work on building those relationships, to be that example, to be that safe place where people can come and ask questions and ask for prayer. For me to think about that 50% of the women, the student athletes that Courtney Grah works with, have never heard the gospel just astounds me. And it reminds me, and I pray it will remind you too, to look for opportunities to share your faith. Look for opportunities to build relationships with others and share with them the hardships and the joys and what you've learned by serving Christ. We're out of time. We've got to go, but we say goodbye and God bless you.